you learned your lesson. Bye.
I think somewhere in the Department of Defense, there's like a big flow chart or something that, in theory, would explain the grand strategy behind all this shit.
Yes, it's called a clean break.
Yeah. Google that if you don't know what it is.
Yeah, Google a clean break, a new strategy for securing the realm.
The realm.
Yes.
They're on Game of Thrones. Where are we next in the list?
Speaking of Donald Trump having the right idea on something, Donald Trump has apparently, or according to him, says that he is coming around on ending this trade war on China, which I didn't even...
I skipped right over that on our list. And when you just said that segue, I was like, what the fuck? I thought that was your segue for our next story.
No. I guess it does connect to China, but we'll so basically Apple's Tim... Okay, so Donald Trump got the right answer, but for the wrong reason. Basically, somehow, the CEO of Apple, Tim Cook, or as Donald Trump calls him, Tim Apple, managed to convince Donald Trump that his tariff policy on China makes Apple less competitive with Samsung in foreign markets, which is true. I don't really feel like thinking about how exactly that works, but I'm sure it's true. Tariffs are bad, as we know. And I'm sure as part of my contract is being a libertarian at the university I go to, I should just accept any negative thing that's said about tariffs. So, yeah. So,
even
tariffs,
if it's like not correct or doesn't make sense, if it's negative.
I admit I'm trying to put on my Austrian hat as I speak and trying to figure out exactly the logic trade war. Okay, Samsung is a Korean company. Okay, well, that's it. Yeah. So Samsung is not targeted by these tariffs, and so it can freely trade in both China and the United States. Meanwhile, Apple is based in the United States, cannot easily produce in China. It probably gets cost in other places. So now, because of this American-Chinese trade war, a South Korean company is benefiting. Okay, it's actually easy if I come to think about it. I love the subheadline on this article so the headline is Trump says Tim Cook made good case that trade war helped Samsung over Apple. And then the subheadline is just a quote, I'm thinking about it. Which is very Donald Trump, I've found. It's like, I'm thinking about it. Just you're just putting in a black box. It's like a magic 8-ball of policy sometimes.
Yeah.
So Donald Trump, says he's pulling out from Syria because when he said he was pulling out from Syria, literally it was just because Erdogan pointed out that ISIS was defeated, and so Trump said, "Oh, okay, I'll think about that," and then it's like, do 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 do, and then he says, "Okay, we're pulling out of Syria."
It's like that machine that makes that predicts the golden ticket from Willy Wonka.
Yeah, and then
enter it in, and then it takes like 10 seconds of and then it spits out a little card.
Yeah. And then John Bolton and Mike Pompeo just kind of grabbed his head and shook him again. And they said, I guess we're sticking around for a few more.
And all of a sudden, bing, new card comes out. Says, we're sticking around.
Speaking of Donald Trump's strange interactions with business, Donald Trump hereby ordered businesses to stop doing business with China. Which, now that was pretty fascist.
This is like when Michael Scott declared bankruptcy.
I declare it.
No, I hereby order. It's like, was this in a tweet? Yeah, it's from a tweet. Our great American companies are hereby ordered to immediately start looking at an alternative to China,
including bringing your companies home and making your products in the USA. I will be responding to China's tariffs this afternoon. This is a great opportunity for the United States.
Oh my God. Economists and libertarians everywhere read that sentence and just went, like their heart just dropped. There's like that Tom Woods, not that I'd ever listened to Tom Woods. Tom Woods has a comment about how it must be like the worst thing in the world to be an economist because you're on your deathbed, right? And you spent 60 years teaching very simple, basic economic principles that any person could understand in an hour. It could understand the gist of all of it. And then you're laying there in bed and you ask your nurse if she could turn on the television and you see the president of the United States says that tariffs were just put on American goods, and in response, he's going to put tariffs on Chinese goods, and he says this is a great opportunity for the United States. And you just think, what was it all for?
Yeah, and this is something I probably brought this up that Brian Kaplan says that even the worst economist is better on economics than the best non-economist, because you can look at basically any trained economist, no matter how hostile they are, no matter how hostile an economist is to capitalism, they will still be for free trade.
Even the most ideologically possessed economist will be for free trade.
Yeah. Like they will, like,
at least more for free trade than they would be if they were not an economist.
Yeah. Or even if, granted, the thing that they call free trade might be like unworthy of the name, but like every economist accepts, like in general principle, that when countries work together and exchange things, that's better, right? Like, yes, like let's not be too weird about it. Like, sure, like I'm sure Paul Krugman's conception of what free trade is probably involves, I don't want to straw man Paul Krugman a bit much, but I'm sure I wouldn't agree with it, right? I don't know what his view is, but I'm sure it's wrong. But, I'm sure it's not perfect, but Paul Krugman, would agree in theory that free trade is good, right? Autarky, bad. Free trade, mutual cooperation. I mean, even fascist governments, they were opposed to free trade, but then, once they were actually in power, they had these sort of like bilateral exchange agreements.
Yeah. Basically, miniature free trade zones.
Yeah, or not even that. Like they were sort of fixing prices on specific goods.
Yeah.
Right. Which means they had to have already, accepted the concept, like the concepts of comparative advantage and all these things. So, but non-economists, the plebs, really, no matter how much you try to explain it, just don't want to believe that free trade is good.
Yeah.
They really don't. It's actually amazing.
Yeah, they want to believe that that they can just get something for nothing.
Yes. Speaking of people who worked tirelessly under the impression that if you just explained concepts enough, people would understand them, the libertarian world lost David Koch. David Koch is one half of the American right-wing supervillain team called the Koch brothers.
David Koch, for those who don't know, the inventor of the formula for Coca-Cola, has died.
There are actually 4 Koch brothers, but only David and Charles are, or in this case were, the ones that we called the Koch brothers, because they were the ones that did all the donations that Bernie Sanders didn't like. David Koch was a donor to, for example, George Mason University, to Americans for Prosperity, Libertarian Party, probably Reason Magazine or the Reason Foundation or whatever. I mean, Murray Rothbard called it the Kochtopus because they seem to have, well, just kind of self-explanatory on that one. There are very few libertarian organizations that the Koch brothers were not somehow patrons of. And this is not a joke. It's actually kind of funny. You can usually tell which ones aren't Koch affiliated because they tend to use blue rather than yellow. That's both a way of saying, like, the Mises Institute, but also, like, Foundation for Economic Education, Young Americans for Liberty uses blue instead of yellow. But the ones that use yellow, I found, are Koch affiliated.
That's so weird.
Isn't that like a weird pattern? I just thought of it as I was speaking. It's like, oh yeah, they all kind of...
Here's the only reason I would be happy when him and his other brother are dead, is just because they mispronounce their own name, and it bothers me. Their name is clearly something like Koch. It's not Koch.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. It's not the real thing. But anyway, I want to point something out. That right now, his death is being celebrated all over the left-wing world, right?
Yeah.
Your Voice Mag says, David Koch is dead, and it's perfectly moral to celebrate his death. Because Bill Maher celebrated his death.
Of course he did. Remember when Bill Maher claimed to be libertarian?
He still does. He likes to do that. I used to be libertarian, okay? But they got so crazy with the Kochs and blah, blah, blah. He was never a libertarian. He was just a guy who smoked weed and liked hookers. That's a thing. That exists. You don't have to be a libertarian. You can just be a guy who likes hookers. What I find interesting is that David Koch considered himself socially liberal. He supported abortion rights, gay rights, same-sex marriage, stem cell research. He was against the war on drugs. He was more anti-war than the average Republican, although without being like crazy about it.
He was also for open borders, like extremely
he was for open borders and immigration, and yet he's considered just as bad as anyone on the right that you.
Yeah, it didn't save him.
It didn't save him, right? He's left wing on everything except what? Economics?
Yeah.
Like that's the only thing where you could say he would not fit into the Democratic Party, is that he likes lower taxes, lower regulations, more free markets.
And I mean, he was the epitome. He was the epitome of this line that I frankly don't like. That libertarians are, socially liberal and fiscally conservative. I mean, that was I'm sure. I bet he thought that line up. I bet that was his creation.
Yeah,
and a lot of people in our circles, us in the Moral Minority podcast, right? Are come from a brand of libertarianism that split from the Koch brothers' brand of libertarianism on not the most friendly of terms. I mean, there are plenty of people, on our side of a lot who, up until about 2 weeks ago, if you asked them what they thought of David Koch, probably wouldn't have anything nice to say about him, because on a personal level, especially some of the older members, just did not like him, because David Koch, like, if we're going to be honest here, many people found Murray Rothbard to be, kind of personally distasteful. They just didn't like Murray Rothbard, and so, obviously that's a wrong. There's nothing to not like about Murray, so that caused them to leave, right? If you just Google, just after this article, actually I will link it to the show notes, an article called "Murray Rothbard versus the Kochtopus," I think it's called.
Great article.
Yeah, great article. You can learn all about this split, but again, really think about that. For us, before he died, we didn't like David Koch, but his sin really was like inside baseball, personal stuff, and a disagreement on strategy. And those were important things.
Yeah, and some disagreements on beliefs and
yeah, I guess the immigration thing was a serious thing.
And how hard you are on certain issues. Like he left the Libertarian Party because in the 80s, I think 84, it supported it supported a plank in the platform that would oppose all taxes.
God.
That's what made him leave the party.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, interesting point for the left-wing people. The billionaire evil guy left the Libertarian Party when they stopped, when they were against all taxes. Then he said that's too far.
Yeah.
Interesting how that works.
Yeah, and so I wish I lived in a world where I could hate David Koch, like, for real. Right?
Yeah, like he was the enemy.
Yeah. I wish I lived in a world where it was a libertarian society and then it was, good and right and just Misesian libertarians like myself on one side. And then on the other hand, there were sort of, crazy liberals like David Koch who thought that people should be smoking weed and we should have open borders. Right? Like I wish the biggest problem I had was that I lived in a successful libertarian society and David Koch kept trying to invite more people into it.
Yeah, right?
That would be amazing.
Or where we have knockdown, drag-out fights and articles written every day about how this monster, David Koch, he wants the income tax rate to be 1%.
Yeah.
It's outrageous.
Yeah, I wish my problem was that David Koch was mobilizing, the mainstream media machine against me just because I wasn't exactly the same kind of libertarian he was.
But I find this interesting. And it's a point about the left. Again, I just want to quickly go through. This is a guy, a billionaire, who was against the Iraq War. Remember that? Bush lied, people died. Remember that? He was against the Iraq War, and he, again, socially liberal, support the women's right to choose, gay rights. He was a supporter of same-sex marriage from like the 70s going forward. Supported stem cell research, was against the war on drugs. What else did he do? He has a charitable foundation. He gave money, hundreds of millions of dollars, to cancer research. He was on the